Now we have our colors mixed based on the original leaf. It is quite dark on the monitor, but in fact it shows the shadows and the midrib colors, and I mixed up a green for the shadows based on what the shadows look like in the photograph. So I've come up with, for our local color, I've come up with sap green and ultramarine blue. For the midrib and the secondary veins, I've come up with sap green and Windsor lemon. And for the shadow colors and our pillows, I've come up with sap green, ultramarine blue, and permanent rose. As you can see, these concentrations are quite strong, and here they are. Here is my sap green with Windsor lemon, my sap green with ultramarine blue, and the shadow color sap green with ultramarine blue and permanent rose. I've left spaces between them so I could take and dilute as need be and still maintain my colors. I know how it has to look based on this library that I've created for future reference. Now I'm ready to paint. So here we have our first layer of color. I have used the sap green and the Windsor lemon to begin with. I'm not too concerned about the richness of the color. Usually with a tea wash we work much lighter than this, but since this is a very dark green leaf, I'm not too worried that this color is going to be too strong. I also added in some areas a little bit of Prussian blue to indicate any highlights or reflections from the sun. Now it's time to let this dry so that I can put on my next layer, which will be another flat layer, which will be these blades that are separating the secondary veins. The next step in this process is to add another layer of wash to separate the secondary veins from the blade. And so I have diluted my local color enough to create another flat wash. Although what I am also doing is avoiding a little bit of the highlight blue, just kind of blending it in so that I have totally soft edges. Leaving that first layer of color visible that represent the secondary veins. I am dampening the page a little bit to make the green flow a little bit more easily. And you can see now how that midrib is starting to show up. Between the midrib and the secondary ribs. Now they'll start to become even more evident once we start to paint the shadows on the ribs. Now I'm going to take my color for the light side of the leaf and I'm going to add just a little of the shadow color to that, so that the color on the shadow side of the leaf is just a little cooler in value. Again, we don't want to leave any puddles. We can always add, we can't always subtract. And the nice thing about a leaf that has lots of pillowing is that a lot of what seem like loose ends can be corrected with dry brush. And so I'll continue to do this until I have another layer of color onto this leaf. Now the first two layers are dry, we will start to put in some shadows, which will help to further distinguish the veins from the secondary veins from the blade. These shadows will be for the main structure of the leaf. So what does that mean? That means that I am going to put in a shadow along this edge, and it might blend out a little bit, and there'll be shadows for each of the separations along the veins, so that we start to see the basic structure of this leaf, which means identifying the midrib further, identifying each of the blades separated by secondary veins. We are not going to worry about all of these small little shadows that are part of the pillowing that is characteristic of this leaf. So that is where we're going to begin this process of painting. In this case, I'm going to work dry because the areas are so small and they don't really need to be moistened in order to do this step of the process. Now these may appear a little lighter than what we will ultimately end up with, but that's okay because we will eventually dry brush a lot of these shapes to get them up to the true value of the leaf. Now, there will be some variation in the tones on each of these blade separations, so we're going to try and add a little bit more darkness in certain areas, and while it's wet, allow it to just bleed into position. Now with some of these larger spaces here, I will put down a little bit of moisture just to get the paint to work smoothly. as we get towards this highlight area, we will lighten up the shadow and then add again. So I'll continue like this until I have this entire leaf painted with its shadow areas.